step into the shadowy world of St. Mary Mead, where a dazzling opera star, Madame Elena Voss, vanishes hours before her performance, plunging a quaint village theater into chaos. Was it the ambitious understudy, desperate for the spotlight, the fiery director, hiding a grudge, the meticulous manager with secrets in his ledger, or the obsessive fan, whose devotion borders on danger? Join Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a web of lavender-scented clues, cryptic notes, and theatrical deception to uncover the truth before the curtain rises. In this Agatha Christie-inspired mystery, every whisper hides a secret, and every clue leads to a shocking revelation. Chapter 1. The curtain rises. The autumn air in St. Mary Mead carried a crispness that hinted at the turning of seasons. But within the walls of the village hall, a different kind of anticipation stirred. The Grand Touring Opera Company, a troupe of some renown, had arrived to grace the modest stage with a performance of La Traviata, an event that had set tongues wagging from the vicarage to the post office. The star of the evening, Madame Elena Voss, was a name that sparkled even in the provincial glow of St. Mary Mead, her soprano voice lauded in the papers as a celestial gift. Yet, as Miss Jane Marple settled into her usual seat near the back of the hall, her knitting needles moving with their customary rhythm, she sensed an undercurrent of unease beneath the chatter of the gathering crowd. Miss Marple, with her soft, white hair and deceptively mild blue eyes, was no stranger to the subtle discordances that betrayed human affairs. She had agreed to attend at the urging of her friend, Mrs. Dolly Bantry, whose enthusiasm for the opera bordered on the evangelical. "Jane, you simply must come," Mrs. Bantry had insisted over tea at Gossington Hall. "It's not every day we get a real diva in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple, ever indulgent of her friend's exuberance, had acquiesced, though her interest lay less in Verdi's arias, and more in the curious assembly of characters the opera had drawn to the village. The theater, a converted barn with a newly polished stage, buzzed with anticipation. Villagers in their Sunday best mingled with the opera company's entourage, their city polish a stark contrast to the local tweeds and woolens. Miss Marple's sharp gaze swept over the scene, noting the key figures of the drama that, unbeknownst to the crowd, was already unfolding. There was Signor Alberto Rossi, the company's director, a man whose flamboyant gestures and rapid Italian exclamations marked him as a tempestuous force. His dark eyes flashed as he barked orders at a hapless stagehand, his gold ring catching the light with every wave of his hand. Miss Marple thought he resembled Mr. Carstairs, the village choirmaster, whose passion for music often masked a deeper impatience with those who failed to meet his standards. Nearby, Clara Dane, the understudy, stood poised in a corner, her auburn hair gleaming under the gaslights. She was a striking young woman, her features sharp and her posture betraying a restless ambition. Miss Marple observed the way Clara's eyes darted toward the stage, as if already imagining herself in Madame Voss's spotlight. It put Miss Marple in mind of young Emily, who had once schemed to take the lead in the church pageant, her smiles hiding a fierce determination. Mr. Harold Blake, the company's manager, was a study in contrasts to Rossi's fire. His suit was immaculate, his spectacles polished to a gleam, and his manner as precise as the ledger he clutched. He moved among the crowd, offering tight smiles and assurances that all was in order. Though Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hands, he reminded her of Mr. Hodges, the village accountant, whose fastidiousness had once concealed a secret penchant for risky bets. And then there was Mr. Felix Ward, a young man whose devotion to Madame Voss bordered on the fanatical. He hovered near the theater's entrance, clutching a bouquet of roses, his thin frame and fervent eyes marking him as an outsider in both the village and the company. Miss Marple recalled a lad from St. Mary Mead who had followed the postmistress with similar ardor. His letters filled with poetry, but his actions tinged with something less innocent. The hall dimmed, and a hush fell as the overture's first notes were expected. But instead of music, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Madame Voss, it seemed, had not appeared for the final rehearsal, and her whereabouts were unknown. Mrs. Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Jane, isn't it thrilling? A real mystery, right? Here in our theater." Miss Marple's needles paused, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Thrilling, perhaps," she said softly, "but mysteries, Dolly, have a way of revealing more than one expects." As the crowd's whispers grew, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a visiting lecturer had vanished before a talk, only to be found hiding in a friend's attic, overwhelmed by nerves. But something in the air tonight, perhaps the scent of lavender that lingered faintly, or the nervous glances among the company, suggested a deeper intrigue. The curtain had risen, not on Verdi's opera, but on a puzzle that Miss Marple felt compelled to unravel. Chapter 2. The empty dressing room. The village hall of St. Mary Mead, though modest by the standards of London's grand theatres, had been transformed into a stage worthy of La Traviata. Its oak beams were draped with crimson velvet, and the gaslights cast a warm glow over the polished floorboards, lending an air of anticipation that now teetered on the edge of disquiet. The news of Madame Elena Voss's absence had spread like wildfire through the gathered crowd, and by me the theater was a hive of whispered speculation. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a corner of the foyer, her knitting needles clicking with their usual steady rhythm, observed the scene with her characteristic blend of curiosity and detachment. Her mild blue eyes, framed by soft white hair, missed nothing, not the nervous fidgeting of the stagehands, nor the sharp glances exchanged among the opera company's principals. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, ever the enthusiastic hostess, had taken it upon herself to act as liaison between the village and the visiting troupe. It was she who, with a gleam of excitement in her eyes, approached Miss Marple as the clock struck 3. "Jane, it's simply too thrilling," she exclaimed, her voice barely hushed. "Madame Voss has vanished, poof, like something out of one of those dreadful novels Arthur reads. The theater manageress, Mrs. Hargreaves, is beside herself, and Inspector Crane has just arrived. She's asked if you might lend a hand unofficially, of course. You know how you have a knack for it, these things." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained sharp. "A knack, Dolly. Merely observation, and a touch of common sense," she said, tucking her knitting into her reticule. "But I shall be glad to look about. People do not simply vanish, you know, not without leaving some trace." Her mind flickered to a memory of Mrs. Sims, the village seamstress, who had once disappeared for a day to visit a sick cousin, leaving the parish in a tizzy. This, she suspected, was no such innocent errand. The two women made their way through the crowded foyer, past villagers clutching their tickets and opera company members murmuring in anxious knots. Mrs. Hargreaves, a stout woman with a penchant for dramatic gestures, met them at the entrance to the backstage area. "Miss Marple, thank heavens," she cried, her hands fluttering like startled birds. "It's a disaster. Madame Voss was here this morning for rehearsal, as right as rain, and now nothing. Her dressing room is empty, and the performance is in mere hours. Inspector Crane is there now, but he's all questions and no answers." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind already at work. "Let us see this dressing room, Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "The smallest details often tell the largest stories." Mrs. Bantry, trailing behind, suppressed a grin. She knew that tone, and it meant her friend was already piecing together a puzzle no one else had yet perceived. The dressing room was a small, cluttered space tucked behind the stage, its walls adorned with faded posters from past productions. A vanity table stood against one wall, strewn with powders, rouges, and a silver hairbrush engraved with the initials EV. A rack held Madame Voss's costume, a shimmering gown of emerald silk, untouched and pristine. On the table sat a china teacup, half filled with cold tea, its surface undisturbed, save for a faint ring of lipstick on the rim. The air carried a delicate scent, not of the grease paint and dust one might expect, but of lavender soft, almost imperceptible, yet distinct. Inspector Crane, a tall man with a furrowed brow and a notebook clutched like a shield, was questioning a young stagehand who looked as though he wished to be anywhere else. "You're certain you saw nothing unusual?" the inspector pressed, his voice tinged with frustration. "No one coming or going from this room after the rehearsal?" The stagehand, a lanky youth named Tom, shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. I was sweeping the corridor, and Madame Voss left the rehearsal at 10:30, same as always. She came in here, and I didn't see her come out. But I wasn't watching the door every second, mind you." Miss Marple, standing quietly to one side, let her gaze roam the room. She noted the teacup, the costume, the faint scuff on the floor, near the vanity, where the rug had been nudged askew. Her eyes lingered on a small scrap of paper, barely visible beneath the table's edge, its corner caught in a splinter of wood. She knelt, her movements slow but deliberate, and retrieved it, holding it to the light. The word curtain was scrawled in a hurried hand, the ink smudged, as though written in haste. She slipped it into her reticule, unnoticed by the inspector, who was now interrogating Mrs. Hargreaves about the morning's schedule. "It's most peculiar," Miss Marple murmured to Mrs. Bantry, who hovered nearby. "This scrap of paper, it's not the sort of thing one leaves by accident. And the lavender scent. It's not from any perfume bottle here." She gestured subtly toward the vanity, where the usual array of cinsaroes, jasmine, and musk sat, in neat rows, none bearing the telltale note of lavender. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "Do you think it's a clue, Jane? Like in one of those detective stories?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her tone measured. "But clues, Dolly, are like stitches in a pattern. One alone means little. It's the way they fit together that matters." Her mind drifted to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a missing brooch had been found in a flower bed, its pin bent as though dropped in a struggle. The lavender scent reminded her of Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, who used lavender sachets in her linen cupboard, a detail that had once unmasked a thief who claimed never to have entered the vicarage. Inspector Crane, having dismissed the stagehand, turned to Miss Marple with a polite but strained smile. "Mrs. Hargreaves tells me you've a sharp eye, Miss Marple. Care to take a look? Though I warn you, there's little here to go on. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no nothing. It's as if the woman walked out and vanished into thin air." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of gentle deference. "I'm sure you've covered all the essentials, Inspector, but perhaps I might look about, if it's no trouble." She moved to the vanity, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface. A smudge of grease paint, barely noticeable, marked the mirror's edge, its shade a vivid crimson that matched none of the cosmetics on the table. "Curious," she said softly, her eyes narrowing. "This grease paint isn't Madame Voss's, I think. She favors softer tones, judging by her powders." The inspector frowned, peering at the smudge. "Could be from one of the other performers," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "This is a theater after all. Grease paint gets everywhere." Indeed, Miss Marple agreed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She recalled a village amateur production, where a young actress had left a similar smudge on a prop table, betraying her presence in a scene she'd claimed not to have rehearsed. The grease paint, like the lavender, was a thread in the tapestry she was beginning to weave. Mrs. Hargreaves, wringing her hands, interrupted. "What are we to do, Miss Marple? The performance is tonight, and Clara Dane, the understudy, is ready to step in, but it's not the same. Madame Voss is the draw. People came from miles to hear her. If she's not found, the company's reputation will suffer." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest at the mention of Clara Dane. Miss Dane is prepared, you say? How fortunate that she's so capable. Her tone was mild, but Mrs. Bantry, who knew her friend well, caught the faintest hint of scrutiny. Might I speak with her, Mrs. Hargreaves? And perhaps Signor Rossi and Mr. Blake as well. It would help to understand Madame Voss's movements this morning. Of course, Mrs. Hargreaves said, bustling off to summon the company's principals. Inspector Crane, meanwhile, scribbled in his notebook, muttering about wild goose chases. Miss Marple, undeterred, stepped to the window, which overlooked a narrow alley behind the theater. The sash was slightly ajar, and a faint breeze carried the same lavender scent she'd noticed earlier. She leaned closer, noting a single thread of green silk caught on the window's latch identical to the fabric of Madame Voss's costume, yet oddly out of place as the gown hung untouched on its rack. "Dolly," she said quietly, "do you recall the time young Tommy Pierce claimed he'd lost his school bag, only for it to be found in the church loft? He'd hidden it himself to avoid a test. People leave traces, even when they mean to cover them." Mrs. Bantry nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "You think someone's hiding something, Jane? Oh, this is better than any play." Miss Marple did not reply, but her mind was racing. The scrap of paper, the grease paint, the lavender, the silk thread, these were not random. They pointed to a purpose, a plan, perhaps even a person. She thought of the suspects she'd observed. In the foyer, Signor Rossi, with his fiery temper and nervous ring-twisting. Clara Dane, whose ambition shone brighter than her talent. Mr. Blake, whose precise exterior might conceal a less orderly secret. And Felix Ward, whose devotion to Madame Voss bordered on the unsettling. Each, she knew, had a role in this drama, whether as actor or audience. As Mrs. Hargreaves returned with Clara Dane in tow, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her knitting needles once more in hand. Clara, dressed in a simple but elegant frock, carried herself with a confidence that bordered on defiance. "I'm ready to perform tonight, if needed," she said, her voice clear but her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. "It's a pity about Madame Voss, but the show must go on." "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "And when did you last see Madame Voss, Miss Dane?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her reticule. "This morning, at rehearsal. She was in fine form, as always. I left before she had to run an errand in the village." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "An errand? You say, how diligent." She made no further comment, but her mind catalogued the reply, noting the faint flush on Clara's cheeks. An errand, she thought, was a convenient excuse, much like the one Mrs. Sims had used when she'd slipped away to visit her cousin. The truth, Miss Marple suspected, lay not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. As Clara excused herself, Miss Marple turned her attention to the room once more, her eyes lingering on the teacup. The lipstick mark was precise, a perfect crescent, yet the tea was untouched beyond a single sip. "A woman who takes one sip and leaves her tea," she murmured, "is either in a great hurry or interrupted." She thought of Madame Voss, whose reputation for professionalism was as renowned as her voice. A woman like that did not simply walk away from a performance, not without reason. The afternoon wore on, and the theater grew quieter as the crowd dispersed, their excitement giving way to unease. Inspector Crane, having questioned the remaining staff, declared the dressing room a dead end and prepared to search the village. Miss Marple, however, lingered, her mind turning over the clues like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The lavender scent, the grease paint, the silk thread, the word curtain, each was a note in a melody she could not yet hear in full. But she knew, with the certainty of long experience, that the truth was there, hidden in the shadows of the stage. "Dolly," she said at last, rising from her seat, "I think we shall learn more before the curtain rises tonight. People, you see, are like actors. They cannot help but leave their mark, even when they try to play a different part. Mrs. Bantry, her eyes alight with anticipation, followed her friend out of the dressing room, leaving the empty space behind as silent witness to a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 3. The director's temper. The backstage corridor of the St. Mary Mead Village Hall was a narrow, dimly lit passage, its walls lined with faded playbills and the faint scent of old wood and polish. The clamor of the theater had subsided into an uneasy hum as the search for Madame Elena Voss continued, with Inspector Crane's men fanning out across the village and the opera company's members retreating to their respective corners. Miss Jane Marple, accompanied by the ever-enthusiastic Mrs. Dolly Bantry, made her way toward the stage, where Signor Alberto Rossi, the company's director, was holding court amidst a flurry of gesticulations and Italian expletives. His presence was a spectacle in itself, a whirlwind of passion that seemed to draw the very air from the room. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked neatly in her reticule, observed Rossi with the quiet intensity of one accustomed to seeing beyond the surface. He was a man of middle years, his dark hair streaked with silver, his eyes alight with a fire that could as easily charm as intimidate. His tailored coat, though elegant, was slightly rumpled, as if he had paced through the night, and his gold ringer heavy band, engraved with a crest, flashed as he waved his arms, berating a trembling stagehand for a misplaced prop. "Imbecile," he cried, his voice echoing off the rafters. "How am I to create art when surrounded by incompetence? And now, Alana gone. It is a catastrophe." Mrs. Bantry, standing beside Miss Marple, raised an eyebrow. "He's rather theatrical, isn't he, Jane? One might think he's enjoying the drama a bit too much." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, catching the same undercurrent of unease that Miss Marple had noted. "Indeed, Dolly," Miss Marple replied softly, her gaze fixed on Rossi. "But passion, you know, can be a mask as much as a revelation. I recall Mr. Carstairs, our old choir master, who would shout and storm when the sopranos missed a note, yet it was often to hide his own uncertainties." She adjusted her shawl, her movements deliberate, as she considered the director's display. Rossi's temper, she suspected, was not merely the outburst of an artist scorned, but a performance in its own right, designed perhaps to deflect scrutiny. Inspector Crane, his notebook ever present, approached Rossi with a mixture of deference and exasperation. "Signor Rossi, if I might have a word," he began, his voice cutting through the director's tirade. "You were the last to see Madame Voss at rehearsal this morning, I understand. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Rossi threw up his hands, his ring catching the light once more. "What happened? She was magnificent, as always. We ran through Act 1, and she sang Violetta with such fire, such soul, but she was how do you say? Insistent. She wanted changes to the blocking, to the tempo, things no director can tolerate without discussion. We argued, yes, but it was nothing. Artists argue, it is the air we breathe." Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have paused. An argument, she thought, was a thread worth pulling. She recalled a village dispute years ago, when a heated exchange between two gardeners over a rose show had led to one sabotaging the other's prize blooms. Arguments, in her experience, were rarely nothing. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but precise. "And what, Signor Rossi, was the nature of this argument? Was Madame Voss, perhaps, distressed when she left you?" Rossi turned to her, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation, as if unused to being questioned by an elderly lady in a woolen cardigan. "Distressed? No, Miss Marple, is it? Alina is a professional." She stormed off to her dressing room, as she often does, to sulk or sip her tea. "I thought no more of it. I had a stage to prepare." His voice rose again, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers twisted the gold ring. a nervous tic that belied his bravado. "Quite so," she said, her tone as soothing as a vicar's sermon. "And you did not see her after she left the stage? Or perhaps notice anyone else lingering nearby?" Rossi's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he shook his head. "No one. The crew was busy. The singers were resting. I was too occupied with my work to play nursemaid to a diva." His words were sharp, but Miss Marple caught a trace of unease, a hesitation that reminded her of young Tommy Pierce, who had once lied about a broken window with the same fleeting glance. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, chimed in. "It's awfully strange, Signor Rossi, that no one saw her leave. A star like Madame Voss doesn't just vanish without a trace, does she?" Her question was innocent enough, but Miss Marple saw Rossi's jaw tighten, his ring twisting growing more pronounced. "People do not vanish, Signora," he said, his accent thickening. "She is somewhere, perhaps, hiding to make a point. Alina is dramatic, you understand, but kidnap, harm, preposterous." He turned away, calling for a stagehand to adjust the spotlight, effectively dismissing them. Inspector Crane scribbled a note, his brow furrowed. "He's a difficult one," he muttered to Miss Marple as they stepped aside. "All bluster, but he's not telling us everything. That argument, there's more to it, I'd wager." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "People often say more than they intend, Inspector, and less than they know. Signor Rossi's temper is interesting, but it's his silences that intrigued me." She thought of the lavender scent in the dressing room, the scrap of paper with its cryptic curtain, and the crimson grease paint, smudge none of which Rossi had mentioned. Had he been in the dressing room after the rehearsal, or was his agitation masking another secret? As they moved away from the stage, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a small table in the wings, where a pile of scripts lay scattered. One, slightly askew, bore a faint mark of smudge of the same crimson grease paint she'd seen on the mirror. She paused, her fingers brushing the paper lightly. "Curious," she murmured, her mind turning over the detail. Grease paint, she knew, was a performer's tool, but its presence here, far from the dressing rooms, suggested carelessness or intent. She recalled a St. Mary Mead amateur production, where a misplaced prop had revealed the thief's haste to cover their tracks. "Dolly," she said quietly, turning to her friend, "do you recall the time Mrs. Clement found her silver teapot in the church hall after someone swore it had been stolen? It was the smudge of polish on the table that gave the culprit away. Small things, you see, can tell large stories." Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. "You're on to something, Jane. Is it Rossi? Do you think he's hiding something about Madame Voss?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Not yet, Dolly, but Signor Rossi is a man under pressure, and pressure, like a tight seam, often reveals where the fabric is weak." She glanced back at the director, now arguing with a lighting technician, his voice rising in a crescendo of frustration. The gold ring, she noted, was twisted so frequently it seemed almost a reflex, a gesture as telling as a confession in the right light. Inspector Crane, meanwhile, was preparing to question the crew further, his patience visibly thinning. "If you see anything else, Miss Marple, you'll let me know," he said, more out of courtesy than expectation. "Of course, Inspector," she replied, her tone as gentle as ever. "But I suspect the answers are closer than we think. A theater, after all, is a place of illusions and truths, hidden in plain sight." As she spoke, her eyes lingered on the stage, where the heavy velvet curtain hung, its folds concealing the secrets of the performance to come. The word curtain from the dressing room scrap echoed in her mind, a clue that felt like the opening note of a much larger melody. Mrs. Bantry, sensing her friend's focus, linked arms with her. "Come, Jane, let's find Clara Dane next. If anyone's eager to step into Madame Voss's shoes, it's her. And you know how ambitious young women can be." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts already weaving a pattern from the threads of the Diva lavender. The grease paint, the ring, the argument. Signor Rossi, she mused, was a man of passion, but passion could be a motive as much as a mask. As she and Mrs. Bantry moved toward the dressing rooms, the theater's lights dimmed briefly, casting long shadows across the stage. Miss Marple, needles, had they been in hand, would have clicked a little faster, for she knew that in the shadows of St. Mary Mead, as in any village, the truth was waiting to take center stage. Chapter 4. The understudy's ambition. The air in the St. Mary Mead Village Hall had grown thick with tension. The earlier excitement of the opera's arrival, now tempered by the mounting mystery of Madame Elena Voss's disappearance. The stage, still bustling with preparations for the evening's performance of La Traviata, seemed to hum with secrets, its every corner a potential hiding place for the truth. Miss Jane Marple, her reticule clasped in one hand, moved through the backstage corridors with Mrs. Dolly Bantry at her side, her serene demeanor belying the sharp curiosity that guided her steps. The faint echo of Signor Rossi's tirade lingered in the distance, but Miss Marple's thoughts had turned to another figure in this unfolding drama, Clara Dane, the understudy, whose poised exterior and eager eyes had caught her attention from the first dot. Clara was to be found in a small alcove near the wings, her auburn hair catching the flicker of a gas lamp as she ran through a series of vocal exercises, her voice a clear, if not transcendent, echo of Madame Voss's renowned soprano. She wore a simple dress of navy serge, its severity offset by a single pearl brooch that gleamed like a watchful eye. As Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry approached, Clara paused, her lips curving into a smile that was both gracious and guarded. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," she said, her tone polished but tinged with a hint of strain. "I suppose you're here about poor Madame Voss. It's dreadful, isn't it? But I'm ready to step in tonight, if needed. The audience mustn't be disappointed." Miss Marple inclined her head, her blue eyes meeting Clara's with a gentleness that masked their scrutiny. "How very professional of you, Miss Dane," she said, her voice as soft as a summer breeze. "It must be quite a responsibility, being prepared to take the stage at a moment's notice. Tell me, when did you last see Madame Voss today?" Clara's fingers tightened briefly on the score she held, a movement so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant than Miss Marple. "This morning, at the rehearsal," she replied, her voice steady. She was in fine form, though perhaps a bit sharp with Signor Rossi over some staging detail. "I left shortly after, to collect some things from my lodgings in the village. I wasn't needed for the rest of the session." Mrs. Bantry, ever eager to play her part, leaned forward. "An errand, you say? My, you're a busy young lady. And you didn't see Madame Voss after that? Not even near her dressing room?" Her tone was bright, but Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of probing, a reflection of her own suspicions. Clara shook her head, her smile unwavering, but her eyes darting briefly to the side. "No, I'm afraid not. I was back at my lodgings until noon, then returned here to prepare. It's all been such a shock." She smoothed her dress, a gesture that reminded Miss Marple of young Lucy, the vicarage girl who had once coveted a solo in the Christmas pageant and fidgeted just so when questioned about a missing hymn book. "Quite understandable," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "And your lodgings Mrs. Price's boarding house, I believe. A pleasant place, I hear, with a lovely view of the high street." Her words were casual, but her mind was cataloging every detail. Clara's hesitation, the pearl brooch, the faint flush that crept into her cheeks at the mention of her lodgings. "Yes, Mrs. Price is very kind," Clara said quickly. "I was there most of the morning, as I said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must warm up my voice. The performance is only hours away, and I need to be ready." She turned back to her exercises, her notes rising with a determined clarity. But Miss Marple noted the way her shoulders stiffened, as if bracing against an unseen weight. As they moved away, Mrs. Bantry whispered, "She's awfully composed, Jane, but there's something about her a bit too eager, perhaps. Do you think she knows more than she's letting on?" Miss Marple lips curved faintly. "Ambition, Dolly, is a powerful force. It can make one bold, but also careless. Miss Dane reminds me of a girl in St. Mary Mead who once borrowed a rival's sheet music to secure a part. The truth, you see, often lies in what people try to hide." Her thoughts returned to the dressing room, the lavender scent, the crimson grease paint, the scrap of paper with curtains scrawled upon it. Clara's errand, she mused, warranted closer inspection. With Mrs. Bantry's enthusiastic agreement, Miss Marple proposed a visit to Mrs. Price's boarding house, a short walk from the theater. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobbled streets of St. Mary Mead, and the village was abuzz with talk of the opera star's disappearance. At the boarding house, Mrs. Price, a plump woman with a penchant for gossip, greeted them warmly. "Oh, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, what a to-do about that singer. Miss Dane's been in and out all morning. Poor dear, what with the performance tonight. She's such a dedicated girl." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the tidy parlor. "Indeed, Mrs. Price. And was Miss Dane here this morning, as she mentioned? Perhaps between 10 and noon?" Mrs. Price nodded vigorously. "Oh, yes. She came back right after the rehearsal, said she needed to fetch some music or some such. In and out in a flash. She was barely here 10 minutes before she headed back to the theater. I saw her carrying a little parcel wrapped in brown paper. Looked like ribbon or fabric, maybe for her costume." Miss Marple's needles, had they been in hand, would have clicked a little faster. "A parcel, you say? How interesting. And did you notice anything else about her? She must be under quite a strain, with Madame Voss missing." Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, between you and me, she seemed a bit jumpy. Kept looking out the window, as if expecting someone. And there was a scent about her, lavender, I think, like the sachets I keep in my linen cupboard. Odd, because she's never worn scent before." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, but Miss Marple merely nodded, her expression serene. "Thank you, Mrs. Price. You've been most helpful." As they stepped back into the street, she murmured to Mrs. Bantry, "Lavender, again. It's like a thread running through this tapestry, don't you think? And that parcel ribbon, perhaps, or something more telling." Back at the theater, Miss Marple requested a moment to inspect Clara's dressing room, a smaller space adjacent to Madame Voss's with Mrs. Hargreaves's permission. She and Mrs. Bantry entered, finding a neat but sparsely furnished room. A small table held a mirror, a few cosmetics, and a stack of sheet music. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a wastebasket in the corner. There, half hidden beneath a crumpled program, was a scrap of lavender ribbon, its scent unmistakable, and identical to the one she'd noted in Madame Voss's dressing room. "Dolly," she said softly, holding up the ribbon, "this is no coincidence. Miss Dane's ambition may have led her closer to Madame Voss's disappearance than she cares to admit." She thought of the greased paint smudge, the silk thread on the window latch, and now this ribbon, a pattern forming, though its full shape remained elusive. Mrs. Bantry, her excitement barely contained, clasped her hands. "Jane, you're marvelous. Do you think Clara's behind it? Locked Madame Voss away to take her place?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her voice remained cautious. "Not so fast, Dolly. Ambition is a motive, but motives are like costumes. They can fit more than one person. We must look further, to see where this ribbon leads." As they left the dressing room, the theater's lights flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the corridor. Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. Each clue a stitch in a pattern she was determined to unravel before the curtain rose on the evening's performance. Chapter 5. The manager's ledger. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows of the St. Mary Mead Village Hall. casting long, wavering shadows across the worn floorboards of the theater's office. The room, tucked behind the ticket booth, was a cramped affair, its walls lined with shelves of dusty programs and yellowed contracts. A single desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkstand, and a ledger bound in dark green leather. Here, Mr. Harold Blake, the opera company's manager, sat hunched over his accounts, his spectacles glinting as he scribbled figures with a precision that bordered on obsession. Miss Jane Marple, accompanied by the indefatigable Mrs. Dolly Bantry, had been granted access to this sanctum at Mrs. Bantry's insistence, her connection with the theater's manageress, Mrs. Hargreaves, proving as useful as ever. Miss Marple's presence in the office was met with a polite but strained nod from Mr. Blake, whose thin frame and pale complexion suggested a man more at home with numbers than with the chaos of a missing soprano. His suit, though immaculate, seemed to hang on him like a borrowed costume, and his fingers, stained faintly with ink, trembled as he adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Marple? Mrs. Bantry?" he said, his voice clipped but courteous. "I understand. You're assisting Inspector Crane in this unfortunate business with Madame Voss. I assure you, I've told him all I know. She was at rehearsal this morning, as usual, and then, well, she simply wasn't. It's most likely a publicity stunt. She's done such things before, you know." Miss Marple's blue eyes, mild yet piercing, studied him closely. "A publicity stunt, Mr. Blake. How interesting. And yet, the performance is mere hours away, and the theater is in quite a state. Surely such a stunt would be ill-timed." Her tone was gentle, but there was a steel beneath it, honed by years of unraveling village intrigues. Mr. Blake's lips twitched, as if caught between a smile and a grimace. "Madame Voss is a star, Miss Marple. Stars have their whims. But yes, it's inconvenient. I've had to reassure the ticket holders, manage the press, and ensure Miss Dane is prepared to step in. It's a nightmare for the books." He gestured to the ledger, his hand lingering on its cover as if it were a talisman against the disorder around him. Mrs. Bantry, never one to stand on ceremony, plopped into a chair opposite the desk. "Goodness, Mr. Blake, you must be run ragged. All those figures to keep straight, and now this. Have you any idea where Madame Voss might have gone, or who might have? Well, helped her along?" Her question was blunt, but her eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. Mr. Blake's fingers tightened on his pen, a faint tremor betraying his composure. "Helped her? You mean foul play? Preposterous. This is an opera company, not a den of villains. I was in this office all morning, balancing the accounts. I saw nothing, heard nothing. My job is to keep the company solvent, not to play detective." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression as serene as a Sunday morning. "Of course, Mr. Blake. Your dedication to your duties is evident. Might I, perhaps, glance at your ledger? I find numbers often tell their own stories, much like people do." Her request was made with such disarming politeness that Mr. Blake hesitated only a moment before sliding the ledger toward her, though his eyes narrowed slightly. As Mrs. Bantry chatted with Mr. Blake about the opera's ticket sales, Miss Marple opened the ledger, her fingers tracing the neat columns of figures. The accounts were meticulous, detailing expenses for costumes, travel, and salaries, each entry inscribed in Mr. Blake's precise hand. But as she turned the pages, her sharp eyes caught a series of small, recurring payments listed simply as FD, sums of £10 or £20, paid out monthly over the past year. The initials tugged at her memory, conjuring the image of Felix Ward, the fervent fan who shadowed Madame Voss with his bouquet of roses. "Curious," Miss Marple murmured, her voice barely audible. She thought of Mr. Hodges, the St. Mary Mead accountant who had once kept a secret ledger to hide his gambling debts, his careful records betraying him when a single discrepancy came to light. These payments to F.W. Mr. Blake, she said, looking up. Might they be for a supplier, perhaps? Or a member of the company? Mr. Blake's face paled, his spectacles slipping slightly down his nose. Oh, those minor expenses. Nothing more. A consultant, for promotional work. Hardly relevant to this business, with Madame Voss. His words were quick, too quick, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand darted to adjust his spectacles. A gesture as telling as Signor Rossi's ring-twisting. Mrs. Bantry, catching the shift in tone, leaned forward. A consultant? My, that sounds mysterious. Who is this F.W.? Someone we should talk to, Jane? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was racing. Perhaps, Dolly, but let us not trouble Mr. Blake further. He has quite enough on his plate. She closed the ledger, her fingers lingering on its cover, as if to memorize its weight. The initials, F.W., were a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, one that linked, perhaps, to the lavender scent, the grease paint smudge, and the scrap of paper in Madame Voss's dressing room. Felix Ward, she mused, was more than a mere fan. His devotion might have a price, and Mr. Blake's ledger suggested he knew it as they rose to leave. Miss Marple paused at the office door, her gaze falling on a small photograph pinned to the wall, a portrait of Madame Voss, radiant in her Violetta costume, her smile as captivating as her voice. The frame was slightly askew, and beneath it, on the ledge, lay a single petal, faded but unmistakably a rose. Mr. Blake, she said, turning back, do you often receive flowers here? From Madame Voss, perhaps? Mr. Blake blinked, his composure faltering. Flowers? Oh yes, fans send them all the time. I suppose that one's from her bouquet. I don't pay much attention to such things. His voice was strained, and Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes darted to the petal, as if it were an accusation. Thank you, Mr. Blake, she said, her tone as mild as ever. You've been most helpful. As she and Mrs. Bantry stepped into the corridor, the office door clicking shut behind them, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the rose petal, its presence as deliberate as the lavender ribbon in Clara Dane's dressing room. She recalled the St. Mary Mead incident, when a single petal found in a church pew had unmasked a jealous suitor's theft of a rival's love letter. Small things, she knew, could unravel large secrets. Dolly, she said quietly. As they made their way back to the theater's foyer, Mr. Blake is a man of order, but order can be a facade. Those payments to F.W., they're not as innocent as he claims, I think. And that rose petal. It's as if someone meant it to be seen. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, her excitement barely contained. You think Blake's hiding something, Jane? Oh, this is getting positively thrilling. Is he in league with that fan, Felix Ward? Or is he covering for someone else? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Patience, Dolly. The truth is like a piece of knitting, one must follow the pattern, stitch by stitch, to see its shape. But I suspect Mr. Blake's ledger holds more than numbers, and Felix Ward may be closer to this mystery than we yet know. As they emerged into the foyer, the theater's bustle enveloped them. The hum of voices and clatter of props, a reminder that the performance loomed. Miss Marple's mind, however, was on the ledger, the petal, and the initials F.W., each a clue in a drama that was far from reaching its final act. Chapter 6. The Fan's Devotion, the St. Mary Mead Village Hall. Now steeped in the lengthening shadows of late afternoon, buzzed with a restless energy as the clock ticked closer to the evening's performance of La Traviata, the absence of Madame Helena Voss had cast a pall over the theater, transforming the anticipation of a grand opera into a murmur of speculation and unease. Miss Jane Marple, her reticule clasped lightly in her hands, navigated the crowded foyer with Mrs. Dolly Bantry at her side, her serene countenance a stark contrast to the flurry of activity around her. Her sharp blue eyes, however, missed nothing, and her thoughts were fixed on the next thread in the tapestry of this mystery, Felix Ward. the young man whose fervent devotion to Madame Voss had marked him as a figure of interest from the moment she first saw him clutching his bouquet of roses. Felix was not difficult to find. He stood near the theater's entrance, a solitary figure in a worn tweed coat that seemed too large for his wiry frame. His dark eyes, intense and unblinking, scanned the crowd as if searching for a glimpse of his idol, and his hands gripped a fresh bouquet of roses, their crimson petals vivid against his pale fingers. The sight reminded Miss Marple of young Peter, a St. Mary Mead lad who had once followed the postmistress with such ardent admiration that he'd taken to leaving violets on her doorstep, a gesture that had masked a less innocent obsession, Mrs. Bantry, ever eager to propel the investigation. "Forward," nudged Miss Marple. "There he is, Jane, that Felix Ward fellow. He looks positively haunted. Do you think he's involved? All those roses rather excessive, don't you think?" Her voice was a conspiratorial whisper, but her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the chase. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Devotion, Dolly, can be a powerful force, but it often blinds as much as it inspires. Let us have a word with Mr. Ward. He may have seen more than he realizes. She approached the young man with her usual gentle demeanor, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, giving her the air of a kindly aunt rather than a keen observer of human nature. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I am Miss Marple, and this is Mrs. Bantry. We're assisting with inquiries about Madame Voss's whereabouts. You're a great admirer of hers, I understand. Might we trouble you for a moment?" Felix started, his eyes darting from Miss Marple to the bouquet in his hands, as if it might betray him. Yes, of course," he stammered, his voice low but fervent. "Madame Voss is a goddess, a true artist. I've followed her from London to Paris to hear every performance, every note, but I'd never harm her, never." His words tumbled out, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened on the roses, crushing a petal that fell silently to the floor. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned in. "Goodness, Mr. Ward, you've been to all her performances. That's dedication. Were you here this morning, then? Perhaps you saw someone near her dressing room, maybe." Felix's face flushed, and he shifted his weight, his eyes dropping to the fallen petal. "I was here, yes, after the rehearsal. I wanted to leave her a gift, a letter. I always leave her something, you see. But I didn't see her, not after she went to her dressing room. I swear it." His voice rose, a note of desperation creeping in, and Miss Marple's mind flickered to a St. Mary Mead youth who had once protested his innocence with similar vehemence, only to be found hiding a stolen locket. "A letter, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was as gentle as a summer breeze, but her eyes were sharp. "How thoughtful. And did you deliver it yourself, to her dressing room? It must be quite an honor to be so close to such a star." Felix hesitated, his gaze flickering to the theater's interior, where stagehands were adjusting props under Signor Rossi's barked orders. Yes, I went to her door, but I didn't go in. I just left the letter on the threshold. I saw Miss Dane nearby, practicing her scales, and I didn't want to disturb anyone. I left right after." His words were quick, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes avoided hers when he mentioned Clara Dane. Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Dane, you say? How curious. And you're sure you didn't see Madame Voss herself, or hear anything unusual?" Felix shook his head, his fingers now crushing another rose petal. "Nothing. I was only there a moment. I had a parcel, too. Just a small gift, but I didn't see her. I swear, I'd do anything to protect her." His voice broke, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the ledger in Mr. Blake's office. The mysterious payments to Ephtaba. Could Felix's devotion have a financial thread woven into the company's accounts? "Protect her, Mr. Ward," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but probing. That's a strong word. Have you ever felt Madame Voss needed protecting? From anyone in particular, perhaps? She watched him closely, noting the way his jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the side as if searching for an escape. No one specific, he said quickly. She's a star, isn't she? People are jealous, always wanting something from her, but I'd never let anyone hurt her. His passion was genuine, but Miss Marple sensed a shadow behind it, a hint of something unspoken. She recalled a Mary Mead girl who had once followed a visiting curate with such fervor that she'd hidden his prayer book, thinking it would keep him in the village longer. Devotion, she knew, could twist into something darker. Mrs. Bantry, sensing the moment, pressed further. A parcel, you mentioned? What sort of gift was it? More roses, perhaps? Her tone was light, but her eyes were as keen as Miss Marple's. Felix's flush deepened. Just a trinket, a lavender sachet, to help her rest. She mentioned once in an interview that she loves lavender. I thought it would be thoughtful. He looked down, his fingers now mangling the bouquet, and Miss Marple's mind snapped to the lavender scent in Madame Voss's dressing room, the ribbon in Clara's wastebasket, the thread of scent that seemed to weave through this mystery. Lavender, she said softly, as if to herself. How very considerate, Mr. Ward. And you left this sachet with your letter. On the threshold, you said. Her question was gentle, but her eyes were fixed on him, noting the way his shoulders hunched, as if bracing against a storm. Yes, exactly, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't go inside. I wouldn't. I wanted her to know I was there, supporting her. He looked up, his eyes pleading, but Miss Marple saw something else, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or guilt. Thank you, Mr. Ward, she said, her tone as kind as ever. You've been most helpful. We shan't keep you from your vigil. As she and Mrs. Bantry moved away, Felix remained by the entrance, his roses drooping slightly, a figure both pitiful and perplexing. Mrs. Bantry, her excitement barely contained, linked arms with Miss Marple. Jane, that boy's positively smitten. But that lavender sachet do? You think it's the same scent we found in the dressing room? And that parcel? Could he have been up to something more than leaving gifts? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Devotion, Dolly, is a curious thing. It can inspire great acts of kindness, but also great folly. Mr. Ward's sachet is a thread worth following, as is his presence near the dressing room, and those initials in Mr. Blake's ledger, F.W. They, may tie him closer to this affair than he admits. Her thoughts turned to the grease paint smudge, the silk thread, the word curtain on the scrap of paper, each a piece of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. As they re-entered the theater, the hum of preparations grew louder, the stagehands scurrying under the weight of the impending performance. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the heavy velvet curtain, its folds concealing the stage where Clara Dane would soon stand in Madame Voss's place. Felix Ward, she mused, was a man driven by passion, but passion could be a motive as much as a mask. The truth, she felt, was drawing nearer, hidden in the shadows of devotion and the scent of lavender that lingered like a ghost. Chapter 7. A Clue, in the Wings, the St. Mary Mead, Village Hall. As evening approached, was a study in contrasts. The polished stage glowed under the gaslights, ready to host La Traviata, while backstage, a restless unease pulsed through the opera company. The absence of Madame Elena Voss had transformed the theater into a stage for suspicion, with every whisper and glance adding to the drama. Miss Jane Marple, her reticule tucked under her arm, moved through the bustling wings with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her serene demeanor a quiet anchor amidst the chaos. Her mind, however, was anything but still, weaving together the threads of lavender, grease paint, and cryptic notes that had emerged from her inquiries. The theater's backstage was a labyrinth of ropes, props, and hurried stagehands, their movements orchestrated by the sharp commands of Signor Alberto Rossi, whose temper had not abated. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the scene, noting the heavy velvet curtain that hung like a sentinel, its folds concealing the stage where Clara Dane was preparing to take Madame Voss's place. The air carried a faint tempest of sawdust and paint, but the lavender scent, ever present in her thoughts, lingered in her memory, a clue that refused to be dismissed. Mrs. Bantry, her enthusiasm undimmed by the hour, nudged Miss Marple as they passed a cluster of stagehands. "Jane, it's like a play within a play, isn't it? All this fuss, and still no sign of Madame Voss. Do you think she's hiding somewhere? Or, worse?" Her voice dropped, her eyes wide with the thrill of the mystery. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "People rarely vanish without purpose, Dolly, and in a theater, where every act is planned, a disappearance is likely part of someone's script." Her thoughts turned to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a gardener named Jem had gone missing before the village fete, only to be found locked in a shed by a rival who coveted his prize marrows. The memory sharpened her focus, and she resolved to explore the theater's lestrodden corners as they moved deeper into the wings. A young stagehand, a freckled lad named Billy, approached, his cap twisted nervously in his hands. "Beg pardon, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Hargreaves said you're helping with the trouble about Madame Voss. I didn't want to bother the inspector, but I heard something odd earlier, near the old storage room at the back, a sort of thump, like someone moving boxes, but that room's been locked for weeks. Thought it might be rats, but—" He trailed off, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be overheard. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained gentle. "A thump, you say, Billy? How very interesting. And this storage room, where might it be?" Her tone was encouraging, and Billy, emboldened, pointed toward a narrow corridor leading off the main stage area. "It's down there, ma'am, past the prop room. Nobody uses it much, not since the theater got new locks last year. But I swear, I heard something, round noon, just after rehearsal." He shuffled his feet, clearly uneasy, and Miss Marple noted the earnestness in his eyes, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead boy who had once confessed to hearing noises in the church loft. Leading to the discovery of a hidden tryst, Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands, her excitement barely contained. "Jane, this could be it. A locked room. Strange noises, why? It's straight out of one of Arthur's detective novels. Shall we tell, Inspector Crane?" Miss Marple's smile was measured. "In due time, Dolly. Let us first see this storage room ourselves. Small sounds, you know, can lead to large revelations." She thanked Billy, who scurried off with a relieved nod, and led Mrs. Bantry down the corridor. Her steps slow but purposeful. The corridor was dimly lit, its walls lined with crates and discarded scenery flats, the air heavy with the musty scent of old canvas. At its end stood a sturdy door, its paint chipped, but its lock gleaming with the polish of recent installation. Miss Marple paused, her fingers brushing the handle, and noted a faint scratch mark near the keyhole, as if someone had forced or tampered with it. The lock, unlike the theater's older fittings, was modern, its brass untarnished, suggesting it had been added with purpose. "Curious," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "A new lock on an old door, in a room no one uses. It's rather like Mr. Hodges locking his garden shed after he started hiding his betting slips there." She knelt, her movements deliberate despite her age, and examined the floor. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, traced a half circle where the door had swung open, and a single thread of green silk identical to the one she'd found on Madame Voss's dressing room window, latch caught on a splinter. Mrs. Bantry, peering over her shoulder, gasped, "Jane, that's the same silk from the dressing room. Do you think Madame Voss is in there? Oh, we must get Inspector Crane at once." Miss Marple rose, her expression calm but her mind racing. "Patience, Dolly. A thread is a clue, but not yet a conclusion." Let us see if this door will yield its secrets. She tapped lightly on the wood, listening for any response, but the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant clatter of the theater. Her thoughts turned to the lavender ribbon, the grease paint smudge, and Felix Ward's sachet, each a piece of a puzzle that seemed to converge on this locked door. She turned to Mrs. Bantry. "Dolly, would you be so kind as to fetch Mrs. Hargreaves? She may have a key, or know who does. And perhaps mention this to Inspector Crane, but discreetly. We wouldn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily." Mrs. Bantry nodded, her eyes alight with purpose, and hurried off, leaving Miss Marple alone in the corridor as she waited. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the scratch mark, her mind weaving a pattern from the clues she'd gathered. The storage room, she suspected, was no mere coincidence. It was a stage within the stage, a place where someone had sought to hide something, or someone. She recalled the case of Jem, the gardener, whose rival had locked him away out of jealousy, leaving a telltale scuff on the shed's threshold. The silk thread, the new lock, the thump Billy had heard. These were not random, but deliberate, pointing to a plan that had been set in motion before the curtain rose. Mrs. Hargreaves arrived, breathless, with a ring of keys jangling in her hand. "Miss Marple, what's this about the storage room? It's been locked since we stored some old costumes last season. I can't imagine why anyone would be there." She fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling, and Miss Marple noted the unease in her eyes, as if she feared what the door might reveal. Inspector Crane appeared moments later, his notebook at the ready, and his brow furrowed with skepticism. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry says you've found something. A locked room. It's probably just props shifting. This theater's old things creak and settle." His tone was dismissive, but he watched as Mrs. Hargreaves fitted a key into the lock. That the door creaked open, revealing a dim, cluttered space filled with trunks, rolled backdrops, and a faint smell of mildew. Miss Marple stepped forward, her eyes adjusting to the gloom, and scanned the room. At first, it seemed empty, but a faint rustle from the far corner drew her attention. She moved closer, her steps careful, and spotted a pile of old curtains, their folds disturbed as if hastily arranged. Beneath them, barely visible, was the edge of a shoe, a woman's shoe. "Elegant and unmistakably Madame Voss's." "Inspector," Miss Marple said quietly, her voice steady, "I believe we've found more than props." She gestured to the pile, and Crane, his skepticism giving way to alarm, strode forward, pulling back the curtains to reveal Madame Voss, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with relief and fear. A lavender-scented cloth lay beside her, its fragrance sharp in the confined space. Mrs. Bantry gasped, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, you've done it. She's alive. But who? How?" Miss Marple's expression remained calm, though her mind was alight with connections. "Not yet, Dolly. We found Madame Voss, but the why and the who are still backstage, waiting for their cue." As Inspector Crane untied the soprano, who whispered of a cloaked figure and a locked door, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Clara Dane, Felix Ward, and the ledger's mysterious F.W. The storage room, she knew, was but one act in a drama that was far from its final bow. Chapter 8. The Lavender Trail. The discovery of Madame Elena Voss in the locked storage room sent a ripple of shock through the St. Mary Mead Village Hall, transforming the theater's backstage into a hive of urgent activity. Inspector Crane, his earlier skepticism replaced by a brisk efficiency, directed his constables to secure the area, while Madame Voss, pale but composed, was carefully freed from her bindings. The lavender-scented cloth that had gagged her lay discarded on the floor, its fragrance sharp and unmistakable, a silent witness to the crime. Miss Jane Marple, standing quietly to one side with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, observed the scene with her characteristic calm, her blue eyes taking in every detail, the crumpled silk of Madame Voss's dress, the faint tremor in her hands, and the way her gaze darted toward the corridor. as if expecting her captor to reappear. Mrs. Bantry, her excitement barely contained, clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, you were right. She was here all along, locked away like something out of a Gothic novel. But who could have done such a thing? And that lavender smell, it's everywhere." Her voice was a fervent whisper, her eyes alight with the thrill of the unfolding drama. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, but her mind was already threading together the clues that had accumulated like stitches in a pattern. "The lavender, Dolly, is a curious thread," she said softly. "It ties this room to the dressing room, to Miss Dane's ribbon, to Mr. Ward's sachet. But threads, you see, must be followed carefully, lest they tangle." Her thoughts flickered to a St. Mary Mead incident, when a lavender sachet in a stolen handbag had unmasked a kleptomaniac housemaid, who swore she'd never touched her mistress's belongings. Inspector Crane, kneeling beside Madame Voss, was gently coaxing her story. "Can you tell us what happened, Madame?" he asked, his notebook poised. "Anything you remember, any detail, could help us find who did this." Madame Voss, her voice hoarse but steady, drew a shuddering breath. "It was after the rehearsal, just past 10. I went to my dressing room to rest. I heard a knock, and then someone in a dark cloak came in. I didn't see their face, they moved so quickly. They pressed a cloth to my face, and it smelled strongly, like lavender. I struggled, but everything went dark. When I woke, I was here, bound and gagged. I heard voices outside. One of them, I think it was Clara's, Miss Dane's. She was humming, as if nothing was wrong. Her eyes widened, a flash of betrayal crossing her features. Miss Marple's needles, had they been in hand, would have clicked a little faster. Clara Dane's name, spoken with such certainty, was a significant stitch in the pattern, she recalled. The lavender ribbon in Clara's dressing room, the understudy's poised ambition, and her claim of an errand that morning. "How very interesting," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Miss Dane, humming outside a locked door. "It's rather like young Emily, who sang cheerfully while hiding a rival's hymn book to secure her place in the choir." Mrs. Ben's eyes widened. "Jane, you think Clara's the culprit?" "She's been so eager to take the stage. Locking Madame Voss away to play Violette, it's positively diabolical." Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression cautious. "Ambition, Dolly, can drive one to desperate acts, but we must not leap to conclusions. The lavender cloth, the silk thread, the word curtain, these suggest a careful plan, but also a certain flourish. We must consider all the players." Her mind turned to Felix Ward's sachet, Mr. Blake's ledger with its payments to F.W., and Signor Rossi's nervous ring-twisting. Each, she knew, had a role in this drama, but the script was not yet clear. Inspector Crane, rising from beside Madame Voss, turned to Miss Marple with a grudging respect. "You've a knack for finding things, Miss Marple. That boy's tip about the noises led us straight to her. But Madame Voss's story points to Miss Dane. I'll have her brought in for questioning at once." He signaled a constable, who hurried off to fetch the understudy. As they waited, Miss Marple stepped closer to the pile of curtains where Madame Voss had been hidden, her eyes scanning the floor. A faint smudge of crimson grease paint, identical to the one in the dressing room, marked the edge of a trunk, as if someone had brushed against it in haste. She knelt, her movements slow but deliberate, and retrieved a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath the trunk's edge. It bore a single word, "Act," scrawled in the same hurried hand as the curtain note from the dressing room. She slipped it into her reticule, unnoticed by the inspector, who was now helping Madame Voss to a chair. "Dolly," she said quietly, turning to her friend, "this grease paint and note suggest our culprit is someone familiar with the theaters, wise someone who moves freely backstage. But the lavender, it's almost too deliberate, don't you think? As if meant to be noticed." She recalled a St. Mary Mead case, when a deliberately placed scent bottle had misled the vicar's wife into suspecting the wrong maid of theft. Mrs. Bantry nodded, her excitement undimmed. It's like a stage direction, Jane. Someone's setting the scene, pointing us toward Clara. But could it be a trick to make her look guilty? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Exactly, Dolly. A clever director knows how to misdirect the audience. We must look beyond the spotlight. Her thoughts turned to Felix Ward, whose lavender sachet and fervent devotion placed him near the dressing room at the critical moment, and to Mr. Blake, whose ledger hinted at secrets yet to be uncovered. Clara Dane arrived, escorted by a constable, her auburn hair slightly disheveled, but her posture defiant. She met Madame Voss's accusing gaze with a flash of surprise, quickly masked by a tight smile. "Alina, thank goodness you're safe," she said, her voice clear but strained. "I've been worried sick, preparing to take your place tonight. What happened?" Inspector Crane, his notebook at the ready, fixed her with a stern look. "Madame Voss says she heard your voice outside this room, Miss Dane, humming, as if all was well. Care to explain where you were between 10 and noon today?" Clara's face paled, but she held her ground. "I told you, I was at my lodgings, fetching some music. I came back to the theater around 11, but I was in my dressing room or the wings, practicing. I didn't come near this storage room. Why would I? I'd never harm Elena, she's my mentor." Her voice rose, a note of indignation mingling with fear, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched, the pearl brooch on her dress catching the light like a silent witness. Madame Voss, her strength returning, leaned forward. "I know your voice, Clara. You were there, outside this door. I heard you humming Violetta's aria, as if you were already taking my place." Her words were sharp, and Clara flinched, her eyes darting to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally. Miss Marple's voice, when she spoke, was gentle but probing. "Miss Dane, you mentioned an errand this morning. Mrs. Price at the boarding house said you carried a parcel ribbon perhaps, or something scented, like lavender." Her question was mild, but her eyes were fixed on Clara, watching for the smallest tell. Clara's flush deepened, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "Ribbon, I may have picked up some fabric for my costume, but nothing scented. I don't use lavender. Why would I? This is absurd." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple recalled young Lucy, whose denials of stealing the hymn book had faltered under similar scrutiny. Inspector Crane scribbled in his notebook, his expression grim. "We'll need to verify your movements, Miss Dane. You'll come with us to answer some questions." As the constable led Clara away, her protests echoing down the corridor, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the lavender cloth, the grease paint, and the new note in her reticule. Clara's ambition was a compelling motive, but the deliberate placement of clues suggested a hand more cunning than desperate. Mrs. Bantry, her eyes wide, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, it's got to be Clara, hasn't it?" Madame Voss heard her. "But that lavender's so odd. Do you think someone's trying to frame her?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "The stage, Dolly, is a place of illusions, and clues can be props in a larger performance. We must follow the lavender trail to its source, and I suspect it may lead us beyond Miss Dane." As the theater's lights flickered, signaling the approach of the performance, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities, each clue a step closer to the truth hidden behind the curtain. Chapter 9. The Understudy's Confession, the St. Mary Mead, Village Hall. Now bathed in the golden glow of early evening, pulsed with the frenetic energy of a theater on the cusp of performance, the discovery of Madame Elena Voss, bound but unharmed, in the locked storage room, had sent ripples of relief and suspicion through the opera company. Yet the mystery of her captor remained unresolved. Backstage, the air was thick with the scent of grease paint and anticipation. The heavy velvet curtain poised to rise on La Traviata with Clara Dane, the ambitious understudy, now preparing to take the stage in Madame Voss's stead. Miss Jane Marple, her reticule clasped lightly in her hands, stood in the wings with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her serene demeanor a quiet counterpoint to the chaos around her. Her sharp blue eyes, however, were fixed on the unfolding drama, her mind weaving together the threads of lavender, grease paint, and cryptic notes that had led them to this moment. Inspector Crane, his notebook brimming with scribbled observations, had escorted Clara Dane to a small rehearsal room off the main corridor, its walls lined with faded sheet music and a single cracked mirror. The room, lit by a flickering gas lamp, felt claustrophobic, its atmosphere heavy with the weight of accusation. Clara sat at a rickety table, her auburn hair catching the light, her pearl brooch glinting like a silent witness. Her earlier defiance had given way to a nervous energy, her fingers twisting a handkerchief as she faced the inspector's stern gaze and Madame Voss's accusing eyes. Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry, permitted to observe at Mrs. Hargreaves's insistence, stood quietly to one side, the former's expression as mild as a summer afternoon, but her mind as sharp as ever. "Miss Dane," Inspector Crane began, his voice firm but measured. "Madame Voss is certain she heard your voice outside the storage room where she was held humming Violetta's aria, no less. You've claimed you were at your lodgings or in your dressing room all morning, yet your story doesn't quite add up. Care to explain yourself?" Clara's face paled, her eyes darting from the inspector to Madame Voss, who sat upright, her regal bearing undiminished by her ordeal. "I told you I was nowhere near that room," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "I was preparing to step in, yes, but I'd never harm Alina. She's everything I aspire to be. Why would I do something so wicked?" Her words were fervent, but Miss Marple noted the way her hands trembled, the handkerchief nearly tearing under her grip. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned toward Miss Marple and whispered, "She's awfully upset, Jane, but there's something in her eyes, guilt, do you think? Or just fear?" Her voice was hushed, but her excitement was palpable, as if she were watching a play unfold. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her thoughts turning to a St. Mary Mead girl, young Emily, who had once wept crocodile tears when accused of stealing a rival's hymn book, only to confess when pressed with evidence. "Fear, perhaps, Dolly," she murmured, "but fear can mask many things, guilt, or even calculation. Let us listen closely." Her gaze remained on Clara, noting the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her eyes avoided Madame Voss's. Madame Voss, her voice steady despite her ordeal, spoke up. "Clara, I know what I heard. Your voice, humming my role, outside that dreadful room. You've always wanted my place, don't deny it, but to go this far." Her tone was laced with betrayal, and Clara flinched as if struck. Inspector Crane leaned forward, his pencil tapping the table. "Miss Dane, we've got a witness placing you near the storage room, and a lavender ribbon in your dressing room that matches the scent in Madame Voss's. Then there's the silk thread, the gris smudge things that point to someone familiar with the theater. You were seen with a parcel this morning, too. If you've anything to say, now's the time." Clara's composure cracked, her handkerchief falling to the table as she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I only wanted one night, one chance to sing Violetta. Elena's always the star, always perfect, and I'm forever in her shadow. I locked her in the storage room after rehearsal. I slipped in when she was alone, used a cloth to subdue hurt, was only chloroform, I swear. I thought she'd be found after the performance, and I'd have my moment. But I didn't use lavender, and I didn't leave any notes or grease paint. I don't know about those." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained serene. Clara's confession was a significant stitch in the pattern, but the lavender, the grease paint, and the notes curtain and act were threads that didn't quite fit. She recalled a St. Mary Mead case, when a confessed thief had been unaware of a planted clue meant to incriminate another, a clever misdirection by a third party. "Miss Dane," she said gently, stepping forward. You say you used chloroform, but no lavender. And you knew nothing of a note left in the dressing room, or another in the storage room. Clara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but confused. Notes? No, I didn't leave any notes. And the cloth was plain, just something I found in the prop room. I don't use lavender, never have. Someone must have added it. Her voice faltered, as if the realization of a larger scheme was dawning. Mrs. Bantry's gasp was audible. Jane, someone's been setting her up. The lavender. The note sits like someone wanted us to suspect Clara all along. Her excitement was barely contained, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression cautioning restraint. Indeed, Dolly, she said softly, a confession clarifies the act, but not the entire play. Someone has been directing this scene, adding flourishes, to ensure Miss Dane took the blame. Her thoughts turned to Felix Ward, whose lavender sachet and presence near the dressing room placed him at the heart of the mystery, and to Mr. Blake's ledger, with its cryptic payments to F.W. The grease paint smudge, she mused, suggested a theatrical touch, perhaps from someone like Signor Rossi, whose temper might conceal more than frustration. Inspector Crane, his brow furrowed, scribbled furiously. Miss Dane, you're admitting to kidnapping Madame Voss. That's a serious charge. But these other details, the lavender, the notes suggest someone else had a hand in this. Any idea who might want to point the finger at you? Clara shook her head, her sobs subsiding into a weary resignation. I don't know. Everyone knows I've wanted Elena's role, but I never meant real harm. I wanted one night to shine. Maybe someone saw me, or guessed what I did, and added those things to make sure I'd be caught. Her voice was small, and Miss Marple noted the genuine bewilderment in her eyes, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead girl who had once been framed for a theft she hadn't committed, betrayed by a rival's cunning. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice as gentle as a vicar's prayer. Miss Dane, you mentioned a cloth from the prop room. Did you see anyone else near the storage room after you left Madame Voss there? Or perhaps earlier, when you were in the dressing room corridor? Clara frowned, her memory strained. I think I saw Felix Ward, that strange fan, near Elena's dressing room when I went to get my music. He was carrying a parcel, looking nervous, but I didn't think anything of it. He's always lurking about. And Signor Rossi was shouting at someone nearby, as usual. I didn't stay long. Her words were halting, but Miss Marple's mind seized on the mention of Felix, the parcel, and Rossi's proximity. Mrs. Bantry, her eyes wide, whispered Jane. Felix again. That lavender sachet of his, it's got to be connected. And Rossi, do you think he's involved, too? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Threads, Dolly, are weaving together, but the pattern is not yet complete. Miss Dane's confession explains the act, but the lavender and notes suggest a second hand, perhaps one with a different motive. Her thoughts turned to Felix Ward's fervent devotion, Mr. Blake's nervous ledger, and the possibility that Signor Rossi's temper hid a deeper role in this drama. Inspector Crane, rising from the table, signaled to a constable. Miss Dane, you'll remain here until we sort this out. Kidnapping's no small matter, and we'll need to verify your story about these extra clues. He turned to Miss Marple, a grudging respect in his eyes. Miss Marple, you've a way of turning up what others miss. Any thoughts on where we should look next? Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene. I should like to speak with Mr. Ward again, Inspector. His devotion to Madame Voss, and his presence near her dressing room, may hold the key to these embellishments. As Clara was led away, her head bowed, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The lavender trail, she knew, was leading her closer to the truth. But the stage was still set for one final revelation before the curtain fell. Chapter 10. The Fan's Secret. The St. Mary Mead Village Hall, now cloaked in the deepening twilight, hummed with the frenetic energy of a theater preparing for its evening performance. The discovery of Madame Elena Voss and Clara Dane's tearful confession had shifted the mystery's center, but the puzzle remained incomplete, its edges jagged with unanswered questions. Miss Jane Marple, her reticule clasped lightly in her hands, stood in the foyer with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her serene demeanor a quiet counterpoint to the bustle of stagehands and the distant strains of the orchestra tuning for La Traviata. Her sharp blue eyes, however, were fixed on a single figure, Felix Ward, the devoted fan whose fervent admiration for Madame Voss had woven him into the fabric of this drama. The lavender scent, the cryptic notes, and the grease paint smudges pointed to a second hand in Clara's crime, and Miss Marple suspected Felix's role was more than that of a mere bystander. Felix stood near the theater's entrance, his wiry frame almost lost in the shadows of the heavy oak doors. His tweed coat hung loosely on his shoulders, and his hands, no longer clutching roses, fidgeted nervously at his sides. His dark eyes, intense and restless, scanned the crowd, as if searching for a sign of Madame Voss, or perhaps dreading her reappearance. Miss Marple, observing him from a distance, was reminded of young Peter from St. Mary Mead, who had once hidden a stolen bicycle to protect its owner, his devotion masking a misguided act that unraveled under scrutiny. Mrs. Bantry, her excitement undimmed by the hour, nudged Miss Marple. "There he is, Jane. That Felix Ward looks positively haunted. Do you think he's the one who added the lavender and those notes to throw us off Clara's trail? It's like something out of one of Arthur's thrillers." Her voice was a fervent whisper, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Devotion, Dolly, can be a curious director of human actions. It can inspire poetry or folly, and sometimes both. Let us see what Mr. Ward has to say about his gifts. She approached Felix with her usual gentle demeanor, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, giving her the air of a kindly aunt rather than a keen unravel of mysteries. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice soft but clear, "we've spoken before, but I wonder if you might spare another moment. Madame Voss has been found, as you may have heard, and Miss Dane has confessed to locking her away. But there are certain details, lavender notes, grease paint, that suggest another hand at work. You mentioned leaving a lavender sachet for Madame Voss. Could you tell us more about that?" Felix started, his eyes widening as if caught in a spotlight. "Found? Oh, thank heavens. But I'd never hurt her, Miss Marple. I told you, I left a letter and a sachet outside her dressing room, that's all. I wanted her to know I was there, supporting her." His words tumbled out, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers twisted together. A nervous echo of Signor Rossi's ring twisting. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward. "A sachet, you said, and you were near her dressing room after rehearsal. Did you see anything odd, Mr. Ward? Anyone lurking about, perhaps Miss Dane herself?" Her tone was bright, but her eyes were as sharp as Miss Marple's. Felix's flush deepened, his gaze dropping to the floor. I saw Miss Dane, yes, in the corridor. She was hurrying away, looking nervous, carrying something, a cloth, maybe. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just left my letter and sachet and went back to the foyer. But he hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. I went back later, around noon, to check if she'd taken the letter. The sachet was gone, but I heard a noise from the storage room down the hall. I thought it was nothing, just props shifting, but I was worried about Elena, so I added a lavender cloth to the storage room to make it look like someone else was involved. I thought it might protect her reputation, make it seem like a prank gone wrong. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained gentle. You added the lavender cloth, Mr. Ward, to the storage room where Madame Voss was found. That's a curious choice. And the notes, curtain and act, did you leave those as well? Her question was mild, but her gaze was piercing, watching for the smallest tell. Felix shook his head vigorously, his hands clenching. No notes. I swear, I only left the cloth. I found it in the prop room, already scented with lavender, was easy to grab. I thought if people found it, they'd think someone else was to blame, not Miss Dane. I didn't want Elena's name dragged through a scandal. She's a goddess. You see, she deserves better. His voice broke, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead youth who had once hidden a stolen locket to save his beloved from suspicion, only to complicate the matter further. Mrs. Bantry's gasp was audible. Jane, he's admitting to tampering with the scene. That lavender cloth, it was meant to mislead us. But those notes, who left those? Her excitement was barely contained, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression cautioning restraint. Indeed, Dolly, she said softly. Mr. Ward's actions, explained the lavender, but the notes and grease paint remain a mystery. Tell me, Mr. Ward, did you see anyone else near the storage room when you left the cloth? Or perhaps in the dressing room corridor earlier? Felix frowned, his memory strained. I think I saw Mr. Blake, the manager, in the corridor when I left the letter. He was carrying some papers, looking agitated, and Signor Rossi was nearby, shouting at a stagehand, as usual. But I didn't stay long. I was too nervous. His words were halting, and Miss Marple noted the genuine confusion in his eyes, suggesting he was unaware of the full scope of the scheme. Inspector Crane, who had joined them after securing Clara Dane, listened with a furrowed brow. So, you're saying you added the lavender cloth to protect Madame Voss's reputation? That's a strange way to go about it, Mr. Ward. And you're sure you didn't leave any notes or touch any grease? Felix nodded, his face pale. I swear, Inspector, just the cloth. I thought it was a prank at first, something Miss Dane did out of jealousy. I didn't know Elena was really in danger until now. His voice trembled, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the ledger's payments to F.W. Could they be linked to Felix's actions, or was there another layer to this drama? Miss Marple's voice, when she spoke, was gentle but probing. Mr. Ward, you've been most forthcoming. But tell me, have you ever received payments from Mr. Blake, perhaps for promotional work or other services related to Madame Voss? Her question was delicate, but her eyes were fixed on him, watching for any flicker of recognition. Felix's eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his face. Payments? No, nothing like that. I follow Elena because I love her art, not for money. I'd never take a penny for it. His denial was vehement, but Miss Marple noted the way his hands shook, a sign of truth or furor, perhaps both. Inspector Crane scribbled in his notebook, his expression grim. We'll need to verify that, Mr. Ward. Tampering with a crime, seen as serious, even if your intentions were misguided. You'll stay here until we sort this out. He signaled the constable to keep an eye on Felix, who slumped against the wall, his fervor dimmed but his eyes still burning with devotion. Mrs. Bantry, her eyes wide, turned to Miss Marple. Jane, he's admitted to the lavender cloth, but not the notes or grease paint. Someone else is still out there pulling strings. Could it be Mr. Blake, or even Rossi, with all his shouting? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. The stage, Dolly, is set for one final act. Mr. Ward's confession clarifies one thread, but the notes and grease paint suggest a director with a subtler touch. We must look to Mr. Blake's ledger and Signor Rossi's temper to see where this drama leads. As the theater's lights dimmed, signaling the imminent rise of the curtain, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. Each clue a step closer to unmasking the true orchestrator of Madame Voss's vanishing. Chapter 11. The Curtain Falls, the St. Mary Mead Village Hall. Now aglow with the soft radiance of gaslights, thrummed with the electric anticipation of the evening's performance. The discovery of Madame Elena Voss, Clara Dane's tearful confession, and Felix Ward's admission to tampering with the crime scene had brought the mystery tantalizingly close to resolution. Yet a few threads remained unknotted in Miss Jane Marple's intricate tapestry. The heavy velvet curtain, poised to rise on La Traviata, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that the true drama was unfolding backstage. Miss Marple, her reticule clasped lightly in her hands, stood in the wings with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her serene countenance masking a mind as sharp as ever, piecing together the final clues, the crimson grease paint, the cryptic notes, and the elusive payments to F.W. and Mr. Blake's ledger. The theater was a hive of activity, with stagehands darting about and the orchestra's final tuning notes drifting through the air. Madame Voss, though shaken, had insisted on performing, her professionalism a beacon amidst the chaos. Her emerald gown shimmered under the lights as she prepared to take the stage, her voice warming up in soft, resolute scales. Miss Marple observed her with quiet admiration, noting the strength that belied her recent ordeal. "A remarkable woman," she murmured to Mrs. Bantry, "much like Mrs. Clement, who once sang in the church choir despite a sprained ankle, driven by duty." Mrs. Bantry, her eyes sparkling with excitement, clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, it's almost too thrilling," Clara's confessed. Felix admitted to the lavender cloth. "But those notes, curtain and act, and that grease, someone's still pulling strings, aren't they? Could it be Mr. Blake, with his sneaky ledger? Or Signor Rossi, with all his shouting?" Her voice was a fervent whisper, her enthusiasm undimmed by the hour. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "The stage, Dolly, is a place of illusions, but every illusion has its architect. Let us have a final word with Mr. Blake and Signor Rossi. The truth, I suspect, lies in the shadows they've cast." She led the way to the manager's office, where Inspector Crane was already questioning Mr. Harold Blake, his notebook brimming with the day's revelations. Mr. Blake sat behind his desk, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight, his hands fidgeting, with a pen as if it might anchor him against the storm of suspicion. Signor Rossi stood nearby, his arms crossed, his gold ring flashing as he muttered in Italian, his temper barely contained. The office, with its cluttered shelves and faded photographs, felt like a stage set for a confrontation, and Miss Marple's presence seemed to shift the air, her gentle demeanor commanding attention without effort. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but clear, "I believe we're close to the final act. Mr. Blake, your ledger has been most illuminating, particularly the payments to F.W. sums that suggest a connection to Mr. Ward. Might you clarify their purpose?" Mr. Blake's face paled, his fingers tightening on the pen. "As I said, Miss Marple, those were for promotional work posters, flyers, that sort of thing. Felix is a fan, yes, but he's helped us spread word of the tour. Nothing sinister, I assure you." His voice was clipped, but Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hands, reminiscent of Mr. Hodges, the St. Mary Mead accountant, whose nervous tics had betrayed his hidden debts. Inspector Crane, his brow furrowed, flipped through his notebook. "Promotional work, you say? Yet Mr. Ward denies receiving any payments. And those notes, curtain and act, found in the dressing room and storage room, they're theatrical, almost as if someone wanted to stage a mystery. Any thoughts, Mr. Blake?" Before Blake could respond, Signor Rossi threw up his hands, his voice a crescendo. "This is madness. I am a director, not a criminal. Those notes, bah, they're nothing, scribbles from a stagehand, perhaps. I argued with Elena, yes, but lock her away. Preposterous." His eyes flashed, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease, his ring twisting more pronounced than ever. Miss Marple's gaze shifted between the two men, her mind weaving the final stitches. "Mr. Blake, Signor Rossi, let us consider the scene." Clara Dane confessed to locking Madame Voss away, driven by ambition. Felix Ward admitted to adding the lavender cloth, hoping to protect her reputation. But the notes in Greece are theatrical flourishes, suggesting someone with a flair for drama. Mr. Blake, your ledger points to Felix, yet he denies payment. And Signor Rossi, your argument with Madame Voss was heated, and you were near the dressing room corridor after rehearsal. Might either of you have seen something or done something to complete this picture? Rossi's face reddened, but Blake spoke first, his voice strained. I may have paid Felix for small tasks, but nothing to do with this. I was in my office, balancing accounts, not planting notes. His protest was vehement, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to Rossi, a silent accusation. Rossi, catching the glance, exploded. You dare suspect me? I create art, not crime. Yes, I was in the corridor, shouting at a stagehand who botched the lighting. But notes, where's paint? I have no time for such nonsense. His ring flashed as he gestured, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A memory stirring. Signor Rossi, she said gently, your ring is most distinctive. I recall a similar crest on a prop in the storage room, a trunk, marked with a smudge of crimson grease paint. Might you have handled it, perhaps while moving scenery? Her question was mild, but her gaze was piercing, watching for the smallest tell. Rossi froze, his hand dropping to his side. A trunk, I may have moved. Some props, yes, but that's my job. I didn't see Alina, or any cloth. His voice faltered, and Miss Marple's mind snapped to the final piece. The grease paint smudge, linking the storage room to the dressing room, and Rossi's presence in both. Inspector, she said, turning to Crane, I believe the notes and grease paint were Signor Rossi's additions, meant to deepen the mystery and cast suspicion on Clara. He knew of her ambition and saw an opportunity to ensure Madame Voss's absence, perhaps to assert control over the production or settle a score from their argument. The payments to FW were a misdirection, possibly to cover Mr. Blake's own indiscretions, but Felix's devotion was genuine, if misguided. Rossi's face crumpled, his temper giving way to defeat. It was a moment of madness, he admitted, his voice low. I saw Clara leave the storage room, looking guilty. I added the notes and grease paint to make it seem more complex, to protect the company's reputation. I didn't know Alina was in danger. Blake, silent, nodded, his own guilt confined to financial fudging, not the crime itself. Inspector Crane, his notebook closing with a snap, signaled his constables. That's enough for now. Rossi, Blake, you'll both answer for this. Miss Marple, you've a knack for cutting through the fog. He shook his head, a grudging smile breaking through. Mrs. Bantry, her eyes wide, clasped Miss Marple's arm. Jane, you've done it. It was Rossi all along, dressing up Clara's crime like a play. Oh, it's better than the opera itself. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Human nature, Dolly, is the true stage, and its players rarely hide their roles completely. As the curtain rose and Madame Voss's voice soared, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the Cluse lavender, grease paint, and notes that had unveiled the truth, bringing the curtain down on this St. Mary Mead drama. Chapter 12. A quiet evening. The final notes of La Traviata had faded into the warm, resonant air of the St. Mary Mead Village Hall, leaving behind a tide of applause that seemed to shake the very rafters. Madame Alina Voss, her voice as radiant as ever despite her ordeal, had taken her beau to a standing ovation, her emerald gown catching the gaslight like a beacon of triumph. The theater, so recently a stage for suspicion and intrigue, now glowed with the catharsis of art, its audience blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded backstage. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual spot near the back, her knitting neatly tucked away, allowed herself a moment to savor the music's lingering echo, though her mind was already turning to the quiet aftermath of the mystery she had unraveled. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, seated beside her, was still alight with the thrill of the day's events, her eyes sparkling as she leaned close. Jane, It was marvelous. Madame Voss sang like an angel. And to think you solved it all. The lavender. The notes, Rossi's scheming, Clara's ambition, Felix's folly. It's better than any opera. Her voice was a fervent whisper, mindful of the villagers filing out around them, their chatter filled with praise for the performance. Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her blue eyes soft but thoughtful. Music, Dolly, has a way of soothing the heart, but human nature provides its own discord. It's merely a matter of listening for the false notes. Her thoughts drifted to the clues that had woven the solution, the lavender ribbon, the crimson grease paint, the cryptic notes, and the ledger's payments to F. Each had played its part, revealing Clara Dane's desperate act, Felix Ward's misguided devotion, and Signor Alberto Rossi's theatrical misdirection, with Mr. Blake's financial indiscretions, a minor but telling subplot, as the theater emptied. Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry made their way to the foyer, where Inspector Crane awaited, his notebook finally at rest. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone carrying a rare warmth, "I'll admit, I thought we were chasing shadows at first, but you saw it clear as day. Clara's confession, Felix's tampering, Rossi's tricks, and Blake's dodgy accounts. The yard could use someone like you." He tipped his hat, a gesture of respect that Miss Marple acknowledged with a modest nod. "You're very kind, Inspector," she replied, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "But I only observe what people reveal, often without meaning to. In a village like St. Mary Mead, one learns that secrets are rarely as hidden as their keepers believe." She thought of countless small dramas, the stolen hymn book, the hidden betting slips, the misplaced brooch that had honed her understanding of human frailties. Mrs. Bantry, linking arms with her friend, steered them toward the cool evening air outside. "Come, Jane, you must come to Gossington Hall for a nightcap. Arthur will want to hear every detail, though he'll never believe how you pieced it all together." Rossi adding those notes to make Clara look guiltier, Felix with his lavender cloth, Blake's sneaky payments. It's a proper tangle. Miss Marple chuckled softly, her shawl drawn close against the autumn chill. "A tangle, perhaps, but human nature is much the same, whether in a theater or a village. Ambition, devotion, pride, they pull the strings, and we need only follow the threads." As they walked down the cobbled street, the lights of St. Mary Mead twinkling in the dusk, Miss Marple's mind lingered on the case. Clara, now facing justice for her reckless act, would learn from her folly, she hoped. Felix, his devotion exposed as both heartfelt and misguided, might find a less perilous outlet for his passion. Rossi, chastened by his exposure, had promised her a lifetime pass to his productions, though she doubted she would use it. And Mr. Blake, his ledger now under scrutiny, had vowed to mend his ways, a promise Miss Marple took with the skepticism of experience. At her cottage, Miss Marple declined the nightcap, preferring the quiet of her own hearth. She settled into her armchair by the fire, its crackle a comforting counterpoint to the day's excitement. Her knitting lay in her lap, untouched for now, as she opened her small notebook, its pages filled with neat jottings from past mysteries. She added a few lines about the vanished opera star, the lavender's deceptive trail, the grease paint's theatrical flourish, the notes that had pointed to a deeper scheme. "Human nature," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the fire's soft hiss, "is the greatest mystery of all." Mrs. Bantry would no doubt recount the tale at the next village tea, embellishing it with her flair for drama, but Miss Marple was content to let the story rest. The firelight danced on her walls, casting shadows that seemed to mimic the theater's curtain, and she smiled, knowing that St. Mary Mead, like any stage, would soon offer another puzzle to unravel. For now, though, the curtain had fallen, and the quiet evening was hers to savor. Step into the shadowy world of St. Mary Mead, where a dazzling opera star, Madame Eleanor Voss, vanishes hours before her performance, plunging a quaint village theater into chaos. Was it the ambitious understudy, desperate for the spotlight? The fiery director, hiding a grudge, the meticulous manager with secrets in his ledger, or the obsessive fan whose devotion borders on danger. Join Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a web of lavender-scented clues, cryptic notes, and theatrical deception to uncover the truth before the curtain rises. In this Agatha Christie-inspired mystery, every whisper hides a secret, and every clue leads to a shocking revelation.